Okay, good morning, everyone. And firstly, thank you for taking the time to dial in and join us. I'm Fitch, Head of Marketing at Glopal. I'm joined today by Carl from our commercial team, who will help out with the Q&A at the end, and Scott Thompson, Commercial Director at Air & Grace, one of our more recent clients. He's here to talk about how they approach international growth and their collaboration with Glopal. Now, before we get into the webinar itself, I just want to frame what we're going to be talking about today. So, Air & Grace recently made a fairly fundamental change to how they operate internationally. They moved away from a merchant of record model, which, if you're not familiar with exactly how that works, we'll go into that in a bit more detail during the call. And they transitioned to a more direct, transparent, and what I would describe as a more genuine D2C approach. Now, what I mean by that is that most merchant of record providers will describe their service, the service that they provide, as facilitating a D2C model, a direct-to-consumer model. But as you'll hear, it turns out that the merchant of record model doesn't actually provide you with an entirely direct relationship with your customer, and that comes with some fairly material downsides. Now, there is absolutely a place for a merchant of record model, but what we find is that many, if not most brands, will eventually outgrow it, which is exactly what happened at Air & Grace. So today we're going to explore that and explain how, by leaving the merchant of record model behind and making the change to a genuine D2C model, Air & Grace significantly reduced their cross-border costs, regained control over pricing and cash flow, strengthened customer relationships, and significantly improved the international buyer experience. This session is designed to be high level and fast paced. We'll try to keep it under 30 minutes. And we'll try not to get too caught up in the weeds. But hopefully, particularly for those of you that are currently running a merchant of record model, it will resonate, perhaps sound familiar, and potentially spark a few questions, which we'll try to address at the end. Now, a bit of housekeeping before we start. The session is being recorded, and you can drop questions into the chat at any point. And then we'll send the recording to everyone afterwards. So if we do overrun a little bit and you need to jump off, then don't worry about it, because we'll send through the recording afterwards. And we'll also send through a follow-up email answering any questions that we don't get a chance to answer today. So I'll start by saying goodbye to Carl for a minute, because he's going to man the chat and the questions, and then we'll get stuck into the main webinar. All right, so Scott. Now, before we dive into Air & Grace and their international journey, perhaps you could walk us through your own personal career journey and how you came to your current role at Air & Grace.
Sure, thank you, Fitch. Good morning, everybody. I think my journey has been a fairly linear one, starting as a graduate at M&S in their buying and merchandising. So I've always been very keen on product and retail. I then went on to head up one of their largest suppliers, Peter Black. They made a lot of their footwear, accessories, jewellery, plush, gifts, toys. And I spent 10 years running that, so I understood supply chains. We had offices around the world, so very much embedded in that commercial part of the journey. But I realised in that part it was probably brands that had the longevity in supplying private label product was probably a stepping stone to where I really wanted to get to. I was lucky enough to be introduced to a lady called Marcia Kilgore, became the MD of Soap and Glory Cosmetics. And together we combined her. She'd run a company called Bliss out in New York, loved MBT trainers and wanted to develop a toning sandal. And we ended up combining her marketing and knowledge of product with my supply chain to come up with a brand called Fit Flop. And two of us above a shop in Kensington High Street developed that brand back in 2007. And interestingly, it was actually wholesale and distribution that grew that brand. But we did launch a website within the first 3 or 4 years, and the business went on to become a $150 million business, sold in about 70 countries around the world. I sold up my shares in that and invested in a true D2C business called Astley Clark, a premium jewelry business. And at the time, that was a leading marketplace. So we stocked 30, 40 beautiful jewelry brands. We had a good international business. It was on a site, Magento 1, had amazing authority. back then, the challenge was all about CPAs, trying to get new customers onto the site. We struggled a little bit, wasn't quite the turnaround I'd hoped for initially, but we pivoted it to become a brand, and then turned what was at that time a £1 million loss within a few years into a £1 million profit. So we were competing with Misoma, Monica Vinader, and brands like that. And in fact, we were quite early into cross-border. Astley Clark was one of the first jewelry companies in the UK. We were a Global E customer back in 2014. And I ran that business for about 11 years, sold up my shares in 2024, and now really enjoy working with startup, scale-up businesses, defining their strategy, helping them become profitable. And I've been working with Erin Gray since the back end of 24. I've known the founder, Claire, for over 15 years. She was part of my team at FitFlop. And I think the real advantage for having run a sort of £6-7 million D2C business in Astley Clark, with only a few sort of people on the team, is that you quickly get to know pretty much everything there is about the digital space, how budgets are wasted, digital marketing, and cross-border. And at Astley Clark, it was probably 20-30% of our business was outside the UK. And I think, like all small brands, Erin Grace needed growth and efficiency. So our focus has been on international, mainly for growth. You'll see Russell and Bromley this week been taken into administration and bought out by Next. There's plenty of other stories in that space. So everybody's pretty much scrapping for the same pound. Everybody's being squeezed. So new markets are really quite important to smaller brands.
Yeah, quite tough out there, particularly for UK brands at the moment. So by the sounds of it, you've probably seen it all at some point in your career. But were there any particular experiences that have really shaped the way that you think about e-commerce and particularly cross-border today?
Yeah, I think in the early days at FitFlop, my job was not just on sort of supply chain, but also on sales and distribution. And I spent a year traveling around the world appointing distributors. And what I would say about international is that you never really know which market is going to work or not work until you've tried it. So it really is a bit of a lottery. It's a bit of a gamble. It's a bit of a numbers game. I mean, who would have thought that the Netherlands, one of the smallest European countries, turned out to be a huge market for us at FitFlop? It turns out they're real Anglophiles. They love newness. They love innovation. And we were on fire in Holland. You know, Germany, probably 5 times bigger as a country, was a real struggle. They're quite defensive. They're quite apprehensive about newness. They stick to what they know. So I think, you know, what's driven our kind of rationale, I suppose, when we're trying to develop new areas is get in there, try it, give it a go, and see what the market actually wants from you.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting and valuable point. And it's something that really feeds into our own approach and our own philosophy towards cross-border, which I think I'll probably come back to a bit later, because it's pretty critical to the way in which we help people to expand now. For anyone who may not know Erin Grace yet, could you give us just a quick overview of the brand, its history, and what the business looks like today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Claire developed it, and I think it's that kind of intersection between style and comfort. FitFlop probably had a lot of the comfort, but wasn't always the most stylish brand. So she felt, well, we could launch products that compete with the best premium style brands, but also deliver that real super duper comfort. She patented an insole board back in 2014. She started in shows. She bootstrapped the brand. So she started just going to wholesale footwear shows, selling it, you know, to individual independent shoe retailers. And 10 years later, she's now doing 20 to 30,000 pairs a year online. Competes in a hugely aggressive mid-tier footwear category. She's just recently launched hosiery, accessories, belts, bags, and no doubt there'll be other categories to come. I think she's not untypical of that space. She had a large wholesale network. COVID pretty much put an end to a lot of that, so she withdrew and now is entirely 100% online through her website. So very reliant on that in a good way, but it makes the business quite nimble. She launches products quite regularly, quite quickly. So it's quite a nice model for somebody. The team can be quite small. She doesn't have to hold lots of stock for the UK and international wholesalers. Having said that, they cover an awful lot of ground. The team itself is probably no more than 6-7 people. I spend a day a week in the office, help them with direction, and keep the people on track.
Wow. Okay. So, how important is the international component to Aaron Grace's long-term vision? And I suppose what were and what are some of the drivers behind their international ambitions beyond just straight up growth?
Yeah, I think I guess like everybody during COVID, it reached 25% of sales. And again, coming out of that, I think markets softened, the tariffs have come in, higher CPMs on the digital marketing, higher shipping costs, more returns. And I think it's just gradually reduced down. So, me coming into the business was a good opportunity to try to arrest that decline and really do something different. The UK is an environment where people generally feeling the pinch. The US, I know it's kind of a hot potato at the moment with everything going on, but it will grow much faster in 26 than we will. Cross border also can be a threat. It's making easier for brands to transition into the UK. A good example, Axel Arigato is a Swedish brand. Nobody would have heard of that 4 or 5 years ago. They're now quite a strong force in the UK. So I think finding markets is quite important to defend your own position against new entrants as well.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that question because I think the reasons behind people's ambitions to expand have changed in recent years, probably primarily starting at around COVID, where in the old days it was simply about seeking growth. But I think COVID demonstrated that it's hugely risky to be entirely dependent upon one market. And as we all know, in the week when we're watching Davos and stuff, it's a fairly wild time at the moment, and there are a lot of things changing on the international stage, and so you can mitigate and spread your risk by being alive in lots of different markets at once. So before making the shift away from your previous merchant of record model, how would you describe Aaron Grace's international e-commerce setup? What did it feel like to operate on a day-to-day basis? And why did you begin to feel that you'd outgrown that model?
Well, I think it was very much a case of out of sight, out of mind. It was managed, as you mentioned, on a merchant of record platform. So that's a third party platform. All the uplift coefficients for the various markets were set inside that platform. The shipping rates were set inside that platform. You could have fixed or floating prices, but again, all those prices were set up inside that platform. And it was set up probably 4 or 5 years ago by a previous operations manager. I don't honestly think anybody had really looked at it in probably 2 years. It was just sat there and we'd get the odd order in from around the world, but it wasn't being proactively managed. I don't think anybody even had a login. The finance team got these very complicated reconciliations once a month and never really understood it, didn't really understand the profitability. And so I think it was something that the business wasn't really focused on. And we had a big brainstorming session at the start of 25, and international became kind of a topic, and then that sent us down the road of, right, well, if we're going to do this, let's try and change up and make it work. So I think rather than waiting for a QBR, and those eventually dried up because the volume didn't really justify them and everybody wanted them. So I think it was really just wanting to kind of target more flexibly markets with keener prices.
And so, aside from those issues you just highlighted, were there any other aspects of the setup that started to feel limiting from an operational perspective?
Yeah, I think just like the system was out of mind, the journey to the customer was opaque. So we were using a hub and spoke system, and the product could take 10 to 14 days. So it had to leave us by DPD, arrive at a big sorting center, get repackaged, get sent out to the customer. And we didn't really get visibility. The customer might call us or text us, where is it? What have we got? It became a big job for our team to track those orders down, and it was frustrating for the end customer to reach them. Interestingly, when we went live back end of last year, our first order through the Glopal system was in fact from LA, and it was a Thursday. I remember it. I thought, right, let's see when this arrives, and it was there on the Monday. So, and we had all eyes on that chat package because it was via DHL, it was in our account. The customer was delighted to get it so quickly. So immediately we could change all the messaging around the site to say, right, international shipping 3 to 5 days, not sort of 10 to 14. And also, with not being in control in terms of customer service, we were talking to the MOR customer service, who then might be talking to the customer. It's just far easier if we're talking to DHL and saying, here's your tracking number, it's going to be delivered tomorrow. So all those kind of quite granular, nitty-gritty customer service areas can get resolved much more quickly, and you don't feel you're diving into 3 other systems to try and to get it resolved.
I mean, that's quite extraordinary. When you first mentioned that to me the other day when we had a call, it's in the days when everyone's so used to things like Amazon Prime, the idea that it can take 10 to 14 days is that's a real issue. So what was I suppose the moment or the realization that made you decide that the merchant of record model was no longer the right fit for Air and Grace? And what were the main things that you were actually trying to achieve by changing it?
So I think the Shopify platform clearly has been evolving over time, and the guys there do a great job of updating and innovating. And I think one of the big changes that Shopify have made was to markets, regions, shipping zones. And so it's far more transparent and much easier to go into your own system and then control individual countries. A good example, last week, Italy announced that they will charge €2 on all imported shoes coming into the country. And immediately, if we want to, I can go into Italy and Shopify and say, right, increase the coefficient or uplift by 1 or 2% to take into account that €2. So it's far more kind of controllable. And I think MOR was probably the only way to go 5, 10, 15 years ago. But now, with payment methods being much easier, not having to be tied into carriers, being able to use your own customer service, it for us really felt like, right, this is the moment where we can take control of our international volumes and do it in a way that it's using our checkout. We get the cash, we negotiate with DHL, we can tweak, if US is an important market, we can tweak it week by week, even just by saying shipping time 10 days to 3 to 5 days, immediately increases the basket conversion rate. And we can put in shipping thresholds. We could say, right, free shipping to the US over $200 or over $250, or we can try for a few weeks at free shipping on everything, just to try and understand what point does that market become profitable. Previously, we would have had to go into third-party systems. Somebody would have had to be really kind of an expert on it, and we just didn't have that, whereas we've got 2 or 3 experts on Shopify in the business. We've now got 2 vendors at the end of the month. We pay DHL, we pay Glopal for the taxes and duties. So from a finance point of view, it's way easier. And we've got a fairly small team, in fact, just one bookkeeper. So she's thrilled. She doesn't have to wade through reconciliations and try and figure all that out. I think it does feel now international, just like an extension of our UK website. And I think once we potentially integrate to Swap, which currently manages our UK returns, then that will be the whole loop pretty much closed. I think the shipping zones I mentioned, they're a real benefit because Shopify, you can put all the countries in, and we've got 4, and then we can just set those 3 thresholds. We can tweak up and down. So I think whilst growth is the main objective, it's also a bit about visibility, flexibility, and just taking more control of that international element of the business.
And so just to pick up on one of the things you said there, which was about talking about the reconciliation, I wonder if you could just exact, how that was working previously and how it works now in terms of the way in which you receive the money for each transaction.
Yeah, I think so. We globally was the system. You had probably monthly, so you didn't get any money. We happened to be on a monthly payment mechanism, but effectively the reconciliation was pretty complicated because you had high commission fees, you had a fairly opaque amount of duties, taxes. You didn't really know if that was the shipping fee or whether there was an uplift on some of the shipping charges. The returns were coming back obviously at different times. So it was always, you had obviously the payment fees on top. So it really kind of felt like it was disconnected. But now we can literally reconcile profitability by order. So we can see what did we uplift it by, what was the shipping for that delivery, what was the duty and taxes. So it's much easier for us to have eyes on each individual. We shipped something to the Ivory Coast last week. I don't think we've done that probably for 10 years. So we can see, okay, does that work? And we can just, because it's more visible and it's inside the Shopify system and our accountant can see it, then it becomes a little bit easier to then say, well, actually, we need to up that. Or, oh, we've made a better margin than we might have made on a UK order, and it's a strategic area. Let's reduce some of the coefficients or uplifts.
So it sounds like you were probably ready to go for quite a few reasons, but I can imagine it's probably still felt like quite a big decision to move from that model to a new one. And I wonder how you thought about risk, versus the potential reward of making that transition.
Yeah, I think for us, it didn't feel like a significant risk. I think we always felt like it was coming back inside the Shopify model. And everyone who uses Shopify will know they have a bunch of apps, and it almost felt like we were just plugging in the international language app and the international taxes and duties app. And it didn't feel like this was something that was quite scary or risky. They don't have a big tech team. They've got a one-man band who manages the back-end technology of that site. I'm reasonably familiar with the tech, but I'm not a tech expert. So and we did look at obviously other providers in that space, but this didn't feel like it was a big, scary move. It just felt like it was quite within the wheelhouse of Shopify and our team.
I think one of the bits of feedback we hear from people that have made a similar move is that actually, in many ways, it was scarier to stick with the existing thing because a lot of it felt out with their control. They were outsourcing a lot of the control to their business, and by moving away from a merchant record, they were regaining control over their business. So, what sort of internal conversations did this unlock across e-commerce, finance, and operations?
So I think people most excited were probably the marketing team, because I think they thought, right, well, if we can have something that then allows us to translate into different sites. I don't think anybody was wedded to how it was working before. Like I said, the QBRs have pretty much stopped, so nobody was really championing it. So I think finance were delighted to not have to manage it. They also got the cash more quickly. The operational team were delighted because it meant that they could just manage the deliveries through DHL, and we already manage all our global inbound deliveries from all our suppliers through DHL. So we had a strong relationship with them. So everybody felt like, right, we were just simplifying the number of moving parts. And with the translations, potentially it felt like, well, we've got some brand new sites arriving.
So it sounds like directionally everyone was fairly aligned, but there must have been a few conversations you had to have internally. Were there any specific concerns that you needed to address before making that move?
Yeah, I think the key one is sort of the nature of Glopal is that you sort of pay a monthly retainer and a small commission, and where we were, it was a high commission but no monthly. So we had to be confident that we could grow the business in order to then that small commission outweighs the cost of the monthly, and that number is reached fairly quickly. And then obviously as it grows, the savings become quite significant. But in the early days, it's touch and go. So I think we all had to believe that, yes, by translating the site, by being able to offer better shipping times, by being able to offer slightly better prices to customers, then we can grow that. So I think that was the main thrust of it, is that do we back ourselves to get this going? And obviously if our numbers had been bigger, then it would have been a no-brainer out of the gate. But like I said, we were down to 2, 3, 4% of our sales were international. So we were at that stage where there was a small amount of investment up front, but very quickly that pays itself back within 6 months.
And once the decision was made, how long did the transition actually take to move from the merchant record model onto Glopal?
Yeah, so it was, I think we signed in September, and at the end of September, and our first deliveries using Glopal went out at the start of December. So I would say it was probably 6 weeks. It could have probably been a bit faster, but we were trading through peak and Black Friday, and everybody was a little bit distracted by that, obviously. But it was light touch from our end. I think the implementation process was really clear. We've now, on the translation side, got 5 languages ready to go live next week. So again, that process we kicked that off just before Christmas. So that will be a 4 or 5 week time just to get those implemented. So yeah, I think that's been a joy, actually, that process of onboarding, speaking to pretty senior people who know what they're doing and who've done it many times before. And because it's Shopify, it's more about providing URLs rather than doing lots of coding or lots of back end changing. And most of the team, to be honest, haven't really seen anything happening at all.
Well, it's good to hear. I think often one of the things that puts people off is the expectation that it's going to be this enormous implementation project. And actually, like you say, we're often turning these things around in under a month now. So once the new setup was live, what has that changed within the business, both commercially and operationally?
So the warehouse basically had to just install a printer. That was it. So they have the Global system on their desk, and essentially, just like before, they get the order, they print the DHL label, and that then gets collected at 4 p.m. every day. So for them, very simple. And we can see it's dispatched. The customer gets the order dispatched confirmation straight away. So they get to say, oh gosh, my order's on its way. The reporting is much easier. Like I mentioned earlier, we can just instantly look at each order, tweak uplift, shipping rates, and do all of that inside Shopify. And as a result of all of that, conversions are up. I just last week had a quick look, and we put in some free shipping thresholds. We put in the faster shipping times. And so in the last 30 days, the UK business has been up 8% year on year, and our international business is up 88% year on year. So even without any international marketing or even translation, just that conversion rate has really made a difference.
Wow. Okay, it's tough to argue with those numbers. So, what surprised you most once the change was made?
Well, like I said, we haven't really started marketing, but I think it's just the conversion rate in the basket is now turbocharged. And I think, like I said, Ivory Coast, we've never had orders from there. And so it just feels like it's a little bit more accessible for our customers. We've got a call this afternoon where we're talking to the marketing agency about marketing in some of the countries that are beginning to pick up. So I think for us, it's just how easy it's been to implement, but also just how quickly customers are picking up on it.
Well, that's really good to hear. So now you've optimized your cost base and your operating model. What next for Air and Grace in terms of international growth?
I think we've already seen in the first 30 days, US, Ireland, Europeans, Spain, France, we're getting good traction. So translation is the key bit now. So we've got Spanish, Italian, French, Dutch, Portuguese. So we're going to cover within those languages 8-9 countries. So I think investing a bit of time to tailor the translations once they've gone live, develop a tone of voice that works, and just get our marketing message really on point for some of those countries. And we'll probably pick off 2 or 3, and we'll just start to do some PMAX or ASC campaigns and just see how they develop and how they work.
Well, we haven't touched on translation or localization enormously in this conversation, by virtue of the fact that we've only recently launched some translated sites with you. I think 2 days ago was your first one. But this is actually, it's often one of the real deciding factors for brands moving away from a merchant of record model. What a merchant of record model can be good for, as you can probably attest to, is the fact that it can get you up and running, really quite quickly, and it enables you to deal with some of the complexities of international e-commerce, albeit with some downsides. But whilst it might help to facilitate and transact existing international demand, it rarely delivers new international growth beyond perhaps some incremental conversion uplift in the checkout. New growth really relies upon having a solid foundation of translation and localization, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first is one that everybody intuitively understands. If you provide a local language and local currency version of your store in an international market, then more visitors will be able to make their way through the buying funnel and transact payment, particularly in markets like the one in which I live, Japan, where 70% of the buying public don't actually speak any English at all. And what we find on average, and of course it depends, it differs per market, but on average, we typically anticipate doubling the conversion rate of an international market when introducing a new fully localized version of the store. But actually the biggest impact that most brands don't necessarily anticipate is the uplift in customer acquisition through SEO and marketing that's facilitated by the translation and localization. If you've got a site in English and in pounds, the reason you're not getting many Japanese orders, for example, is not just the fact that so few Japanese speak English. It's actually compounded by the fact that most Japanese buyers won't even find your site because it's not in Japanese. It's therefore not, or it's barely ranking in local search engines. And actually, funny enough, whilst that's just an example, we do regularly find that markets like Japan and South Korea are often real surprise success markets for many of our brands, basically because these markets weren't even on the radar for these brands, because when they looked at their analytics, they were getting so little organic traffic that they didn't even consider them to have potential. But it was simply that the brand had no local visibility, whilst they didn't support local language. And the minute that they did provide that local local support through translation and localization, they saw really unexpected growth. Which actually reminds me of that comment you made right at the beginning, and I'm conscious of time, actually, I must wrap up quickly, but you made the comment earlier that your philosophy is based around giving people access, and then the markets themselves will tell you what they want. And that is very much at the core of the approach that we take to expansion at Glopal. In the old days, when it was incredibly expensive to launch internationally, brands would typically go through their analytics, they'd have a look, see where they're getting existing traction, and then they would take a few expensive punts on a small number of strategic markets, which back then was really the only way that you could do it. But today, because the cost of going international has become so much more affordable through the use of technology, we actually advocate the approach where you launch in a really large number of markets, typically anywhere between 25 and 100 new markets. Then you monitor them, you see where you start to get traction, and there are often real surprises that you don't expect. And then when you see those, you double down on those markets, support them with marketing, and then nurture those markets. And this enables you to have a much more iterative and agile approach, which is actually far more data driven. It gives you access to data that previously you could never really get access to. It's real life data, and it also gives you access to a very valuable long tail. Some of these smaller markets may never actually take off enormously, or just get the odd order here and there. But then when you add up all of the small markets together, they may actually be bigger than some of your key markets. Anyway, all is to say that we're very excited to embark on the next phase of Aaron Grace's international journey, because particularly after such a successful initial launch, we're very excited and optimistic about what we can achieve with translation and localization with Aaron Grace. So thank you for your time. Sorry I went on a bit there. I'm going to bring Carl back and see if we've got any questions, and yeah, let's see what people are saying.
Hey guys, good to be back. Got some really cool questions here. Just maybe honing in on the translation, because we did talk a lot about the cross-border piece. Question from Arjun Prant. I'm going to combine two questions because I think they're relevant. How did you think about which markets to localize and how many? My current teammates are saying we should only localize 3 versus potentially 30. What is your advice for me? Heard you started with 20 plus, and I'm going to combine that with how do you think, Michael Brown's question, how do you decide which one's worth putting marketing spend behind and which ones to leave alone? Just combining those two.
Great question. I think, again, it's I think 3 is too few. I think we will eventually have 22 in our first tranche. We're launching 5 next week, and then we'll probably do 2 or 3 batches of 5 to get to that number. In terms of where we spend our marketing money, that's a great question, because I think we know that France, probably Spain and Germany are the key commercial drivers, but I think we'll probably pick 5 European markets. We've got that meeting following up this afternoon, and we will decide, and we'll probably start with audiences in market. So I don't think we're going to start with big awareness campaigns and try and cover. We'll probably start with maybe even 5 European cities and people in market. So people already searching for the French word of shoes, or the German word of trainers, or the Dutch word of handbags. And so people we know are in the markets for those, because we'll be more relevant and applicable. And then build out some of those more mid-bottom funnel campaigns once we start seeing what's the return rate, what's the conversion, what's the in-cart conversion, are there any operational elements to iron out. So I think that's how we will approach it.
Cool. Good answer. Really like that. Also going to combine a couple of questions here, because I think you can hit them at the same time. Question from Dom Egli. As a smaller team, how do you actually keep track of things like duties, taxes, and shipping costs across different countries without it becoming overwhelming? As well as the question about Michelle Ward. How about the shipping with your own account? I see with an MRR, their shipping costs are massive. I think you kind of touched upon that, but would be good to double click on that a bit.
Yeah, I think so. Again, keeping and we have one bookkeeper, and we have a merchandiser and me. I think on the commercial side, so it's one monthly invoice. If we have 30, 40 international orders, they're all broken down. We can see what duties and taxes, and what we've done, which I think is probably quite normal. Most of our product is made in Europe. Some of it's made in Turkey. So we've effectively assigned an uplift. So for us right now, Europe 18%, US maybe 23%, Middle East 27%. And so what we're looking at is, how does that stack up? Were those orders, by the time we've added all the actual costs in, did that uplift work? And they're broadly covered. Before, it was probably too broad brush, and we were probably overcharging international customers. So our skill, as we see it, is to get as tight to the UK margin as we can without padding it, so we can drive those markets.
Cool. I think we're slightly over, everyone. We probably
Sorry.
have one last question. No, all good, all good. I think it's a very interesting conversation. Question from Lisa Grover, and I probably can take this. Does this model require an international subsidiary? The short answer is no. Glopal will handle all of that for you end to end. It's not just a tool for tax calculation, but it's a full end-to-end solution: filing, taxes, registering, monitoring, and doing it all for you without the heavy cost of an MOR. So that's it. We'll come back to the questions we haven't answered and send it back to you by email. Fitch, back to you, I think.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I just popped up. I meant to pop this up earlier. Actually, if anyone's interested in learning more about Air and Grace, you can zap that and take a look. Thanks again, Scott, for your insight. That was great. And we're looking forward to continuing our collaboration with Air and Grace. It's showing enormous potential already. Thank you for everyone else who joined. Now, just quickly before I go, one last piece of housekeeping. So these webinars are becoming increasingly popular, and we're trying to do one a month if we can. Next month we have a session with Julie Alanet, the e-commerce director from Huzalp, which is a French ski wear brand. Coincidentally, they have a not entirely dissimilar story, where they started on a merchant of record model, then tried to embark upon a growth journey themselves by setting up one standalone localized store in South Korea, where they'd already had some success with bricks and mortar stores, but it ended up being a really expensive disaster. But rather than giving up, they moved to Glopal and launched almost immediately in 24 new markets, and they've got a really interesting story to tell. That's going to be at the same time, so 9 a.m. UK time, 10 a.m. European time, on the 26th of February. And again, if you want to zap that QR code, then you can sign up for that. And in any event, we'll send out an invite in a couple of weeks. So yeah, thanks again, chaps, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Fitch. Bye, Carl.